This is the main event. We've watched that debate. Not debate. That it was no debate actually. That interview. And I just want to go to you guys and just get your general impressions. I will say one thing at the top, very brief thing, is that Batya and I have talked about this before, and I love to get something that we agree on, because it's always good to just come together in a kumbaya moment. I like Tim Walz. I mean, it's true that he is a likable guy. His answer about his son in a question that I think was totally unnecessary when you have a limited amount of time with people who don't speak to the media and might be the next president and vice president. But I do think he's generally likable. Michael, yeah, I don't know. I don't know where to even go with this. I have so many comments and so many frustrations. Let's start with the negative, because I'm a jerk. What frustrated you most about that interview that we've been waiting, 34, 35 days for?
Well, yeah, I mean, let me say something. I'll say something positive first. But I mean, I thought it was a very strong finish for Kamala and Walz. Extremely strong. I think it actually redeemed the whole thing. We know how events work psychologically, like the way things finish have a big impact on how we remember the event. So I think that probably that last part makes up for it. I think Dana, was it Dana? How do I say her name? I can't say Dana Bash, right?
It's Dana.
Dana, sorry.
Dana.
I mean, I think it was, Dana kind of left it on the plate for them. So I don't think it was a super difficult thing. But yeah, that natural warmth of Walz is what you're looking for. He's a very familiar character for, he is that kind of assistant coach. There's a humility there that is really, really working for him. And then, of course, I think, she's not as capable, obviously, or maybe not obviously, but I think she's not nearly as capable as Obama as kind of addressing race in a way that really resolves it. But I will say, as somebody that I think, like a lot of, Free Press listeners, that has been kind of disturbed by the ways in which a kind of new racism has emerged in the form of wokeism, I was kind of relieved to see her just kind of be like, I'm not even going to deal with it, because it feels like the country is ready to move on from that really awful, last 3 years, culminating in the summer of 2020. But yeah, I mean, again, I just kind of I find it a little depressing. I've been blackpilled over the last few days a little bit, being like, here she's just succeeding on, honestly, what I think is mostly vaporware. I mean, Batya mentioned the price gouging. She didn't really defend price controls there. And, she just got, raked over the coals on price controls, including by me and others. So it's not really clear. And of course, we now know the grocery stores have a 1.5% profit margin, which is really proof that there's not any significant price gouging going on of anything that you could actually address. So yeah, for me, it's just a little bit like, it's a little cynical as a campaign. It's really relying on emotion and kind of, word salads rather than something sharper, which I think we saw even when Obama wasn't super policy wonky. There was still a kind of a theme, a story. It was tied to his own life story, his character. Certainly the same thing with Trump, super sharp. It was about, protecting national borders and the national economy. So yeah, for me, it doesn't deliver, but it doesn't mean that that's a barrier at all to her winning.
Ollie,
you gonna ask me a question, Michael?
No, because there's just if I ask you a question, Ollie, I go on for 20 minutes because I'm frustrated by this whole thing. Well, why don't I ask you this? Because this is one thing that's sticking in my head. I mean, I think Michael is mostly right in that, and the price gouging stuff, which she's kind of walked back a little bit, because everything is being sort of tested, and it's not working, so they walk back. There's a lot of stuff that she's changed her mind on, and I will say this to anybody who is watching CNN. I don't know if the three of you were before this. There was a panel of 6 people. One of whom is a Republican, one is kind of pretends to be a Republican. And they were all saying, she pretended in 2020 to be a progressive. That's when she was pretending. She was a prosecutor before. And then she turned to be, and now she's getting back to who she really is. And that was, the amen choir of everyone nodding and saying, yeah, that's absolutely right. But, she could have pushed her on things that like BLM, like the defund the police stuff, which people really, really don't like. Race stuff, I agree with Michael. And I think Batya might have said this too, that the non-answer was the best answer on the Trump stuff. That was like, I don't want to talk about it. I think is the right answer. I thought that was smart. But, I don't know. Did we miss opportunities here that there's so much stuff that she seems to have flipped on. And, you know, is she trustworthy?
Yeah, because we were asked, she was asked about fracking, right? And she was asked about the immigration stuff and then economics. Like those were the big kind of meaty things we got, which, as you say, leaves a lot of things off the table. And I would much rather have heard about those. I mean, you know, COVID and the handling of their handling of COVID, for example.
Tim Walz, especially.
Her record in the Senate, we didn't hear anything about. I mean, she was a senator, very progressive senator. And instead we got, you know, Gus Walz seems like a great kid, but like we you know, we have, when you only have half an hour with them, I would have liked a bit more of that, certainly. I also thought you got a real sense of some of the challenges she has on in this campaign in a way maybe we haven't had yet. And it's not so much her record before 2020, it's this weird way where she has to kind of be the hopey changey candidate, but also is the sitting vice president, right? There's all this stuff about like, we've had enough of the last decade, and it's like, well, you guys were in charge for 4 of those 10 years, so you know that is just this incredibly awkward thing she has to deal with, which I don't think she's dealt with satisfactorily tonight.
Did you see the clip of Ben Stiller being asked about this? He said, we need change. It's like, you know, she's the vice president. Batya, what about the Israel answer? What did you think about that?
Well, I want to hear what you found frustrating, because that's really interesting. And then I want to see if I can respond to any of that, because like I said, I think she really knocked it out of the park. So I want to hear what you felt like so frustrated by.
Me in particular, or Michael, or well, look, I think that if you were to put that entire you know, interview into, you know, ChatGPT and say, here, take all these words and give me something substantive out of it, I don't get much. I mean, the child tax credit was the most that I got, and you did mention that. I mean, I disagree. You know, Ben Shapiro, you know, he's the kind of weather vane for a lot of conservatives, that he tweeted during this, "Wow, is she awful?" I didn't get that vibe as such that she was awful, or that she was, you know, I just didn't get any sense that, you know, when she's talking about immigration, you know, you said at one point that this should be a misdemeanor. This shouldn't even be a crime to cross the border. And her response is, well, you know, transnational criminal organizations, when I was a prosecutor, you know, Madam Vice President, that's not what we're talking about, and you know it. And I think that, like, you know, the questions to Tim Walz, did you misspeak? The framing of this stuff, I think that, like Michael, those things about Tim Walz in particular, and I'm just now talking about the sort of general disappointment with the interview, is that, you know, I don't find those things that disqualifying. I find them, you know, it's a little weird, and maybe you sort of plump up your resume here and there. But I just think that there's so much stuff about where this country is, where it needs to go. You know, inflation solved, Bidenomics worked. No. And they should know that American voters don't feel that way. And also, the inflation stuff is because of Donald Trump and the Biden administration spending like crazy. And is there an answer to that, rather than just saying, well, here's a panacea, and that is price controls? I mean, we've tried that in every country that has resulted in shortages and failures. I just didn't get anything out of that. You know, I think that the immigration thing, and I'll say something that I think you might agree with, Batya, the immigration thing, you make a working class issue, as Bernie Sanders used to, and he backed away from it because it no longer became popular in his party when he was running as a Democrat. But is it lowering the wages of working class Americans? I mean, there's a lot of economic studies that suggest that's true. Glom onto that and say, look, I don't have a problem with immigrants. We need immigrants. Immigration is a great thing. My parents are immigrants, but you have to do it legally, and it's very, very much hurting the working class. I think that's, and not just talking about transnational criminal organizations. Give us a real policy on immigration, because that's usually number 2 on voter concerns.
So I think that she has given herself a much harder task than she had to, which is she is refusing to do what the entire Democratic elite establishment did and throw Joe Biden under the bus. She has been treating him with as much dignity and respect as a person possibly could in this situation. She could have, in this interview, done what the Obamas did, what Pelosi did, what everybody did, and just say, look, it was a disaster. You're right. The American people are hurting. It was terrible. And I'm going to do this and this. And she has assiduously refused to do that, which means that she has given herself the task of both not disavowing the last 3 years and sympathizing with the American people who are struggling and trying to offer a solution, something to help. Now, I was scathing after her DNC speech.
You were.
I thought had everything you guys are saying right now about this interview, I think was true of that. But I think that what she did here was really signal a vibe shift in the Democratic Party away from the identity politics. Like Olly, you pointed out, like when she refused to pick up on Donald Trump saying something that everybody called was racist, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it's unimaginable that Obama would have just left that on the table. Just simply saying, I am not going to engage in that. Next question, refusing to call Donald Trump a threat to democracy, like you pointed out, Olly. I mean, this is a real vibe shift in terms of Democrats messaging to say, we're not playing that game anymore. We're going to make a play for the working class again. We're going to make a play to be the party of the middle class, because of course that's what Donald Trump is doing. The whole RNC was about restoring the American dream. Now, again, we don't have to agree with her sort of three-plank economic populist agenda, but she did make it. She did lay it out. She suffers from a lack of conviction because that is not who she is. She is a person who frequently changes her mind. And of course, people are going to say, so how can we trust that you're going to do anything that you're saying? That is always going to be a valid question for Kamala Harris. But I think that she really acquitted herself well here, except on immigration, where I totally agree with you, Michael. What I would say to you, though, is if the Democratic Party is going to return to where it was in the 90s and say, look, we got immigration wrong. We threw our lot in with the over-credentialed elites, the consumers of low-wage labor. And so we opened the border to give them a lot of maids and nannies and landscapers. We realized that was wrong. We want to go back to labor. We're going to reclaim that position. If they were going to be doing that in 5 years, in 10 years, this is what the first step towards doing that would look like. It would be somebody saying, going from saying, I believe we should be decriminalizing illegal border crossing, as Kamala Harris did in 2019, to saying there should be consequences. There must be consequences. I mean, it's obvious from this that the Democrats have got the message that the open border is unacceptable and that they have to really reverse course on that. So I think she really could not have acquitted herself better here. She did a really good job, and I was not expecting that. And I really do think that we can now say this is now an election on the issues. How do you help the working class become the middle class? Do you, do price controls, give people $25,000 tax credit when buying their first home and institute the child tax credit? Or do you institute the child tax credit, close the border, and get rid of free trade and impose tariffs, right? Those are the two models that are at stake here. This is a great election, guys. This is going to be an election on economic policy. And I, for one, looking at this and realizing we're going to get economic populism no matter who wins, could not be happier.
I wish someone would just strangle me right now if those are two options. And I think, Batya, by the way, the Democrats can't go back, and they've learned one lesson. If you remember in 1993 on immigration, Bill Clinton's two nominations of Kimball Wood and Zoe Baird, who had both, the Nannygate stuff, who had both employed immigrants as nannies.
Okay.
Michael, this, I don't know. Where do you think this leaves her after this? I mean, you get the bump here as a convention bump. I mean, she's finally sat down for an interview. There's been it's been a feeding frenzy amongst people on the right who have this very, very easy attack line. Is she in a better position now? Is this going to open herself up to more interviews? Do you think she's going to feel comfortable after this and say, yeah, let's just make this a real race? I mean, Donald Trump is out there talking so much that he appears to be just making up policy. Now we're funding IVF. Did anyone see this today? We're going to the federal government's going to be funding IVF, and now he's like, the abortion stuff in Florida because he talks too much. I mean, do you think this helps her in any way?
Yeah, I mean, I think that where we're at right now is that it's 50-50. I mean, I just say there's some polls and there's different whatever, and yes, she's surging, but whatever, but it is 50-50 right now. And so I think that this is an election that that I think really could and probably will turn on the performance of these two individuals, Trump and Harris, over the next, a couple of months. And I think that does make the race very exciting. I think we also saw Trump come back from this winging it thing where he was just winging it. I'm going to go talk to the black journalist. I'm just going to do my thing. It's obvious that it really starts at the.
It's so hilarious, though.
It can be cringe. I mean, it starts at the RNC where he literally interrupts his own speech, the overly long written speech that he interrupts with just petty stuff. It was a moment for him to complete this transformative arc and be this softer, more transformative leader, and he blew that at the RNC. And then he was just winging it really until this week. And this week, then it clearly, I think that this ruthlessness on both candidates to just throw their base under the bus shows a real desire to win. I will have two exceptions to that, though. I think both on the fracking and the immigration talking points that she gave, you have to understand that those talking points are a desire for her to both position herself as moderate but not alienate the base. I mean, the low-hanging fruit for anybody that knows anything about energy is to be like, the main reason that we've reduced carbon emissions in the United States more than any other country ever was because of the fracking revolution. And if you like renewables, which Democrats supposedly like and popular voters, they're only possible if you have a lot of cheap gas to deal with the heavy intermittency. Everybody knows that. I mean, it's not. And then on the migration thing, I think she can't pivot away from their position because it's a party very captured by George Soros and a kind of political correctness on the migration thing. But just a final point, I agree strongly with Batya on this broader issue, which is that, look, we're in a populist era. I'll call it right now. The neoliberal era is over. It was Obama was starting to kind of break with it just a little bit, but he's basically a neoliberal president. But it's over now. And so, and I think there's a famous political scientist, I believe it's Giovanni Sartori, who does the sun and moon theory of dominant and subordinate parties, where I think in this case, the dominant party with the populist and nationalist agenda is the Republicans, but you see Democrats now mirroring it. So everyone's been, like, people on the right this week or a couple of weeks have been complaining that Harris is just adopting these Trump positions, adopting these populist positions. And so I think that signals something much more very significant historically, that we'll look back and be like, the neoliberal era that began somewhere in the late 70s lasted until around 2016, 2020. And now both parties are firmly populist and nationalist. And it's really a contest between the two parties for what that means.
I think that's so smart. Olly, we got to wrap up. Final thoughts on this event.
Okay, my final thoughts are, here's the kind of bearish case on Harris after this, just for the sake of it, which is to say it was a competent performance. She didn't embarrass herself. She didn't say anything that was going to be clipped and used against her for months on end. But I think what we did see is a very cautious politician. And I think if I were a Democrat, I'd be worried that I'm watching a presidential candidate who thinks she can just kind of cruise it to victory if she doesn't screw up. And actually, it's a very, very close race. And as we discussed, Donald Trump will do anything, throw anyone under the bus to win. So I worry that there's a kind of, if I were a Democrat, I would worry that there's a kind of sense in Kamala HQ that, like, we've got this, guys, we just have to, like, do a few interviews and not say anything dumb. And I'm not sure that's true. I don't think that's what this race is.
If you want to have more of these things, and why would you not? Because if you watch CNN, good God, is it boring? You have to go to the FP.com and subscribe, because we can't do it without subscribers. It's only you that makes it happen. But the other thing that makes this happen, and I want to give one note of thanks because nobody else will, is I want to thank neoliberalism for bringing us all of the technology that we are using right now to stream and just do an end run around traditional media. Thank you, neoliberalism, and all of you are wrong about that. And that's my McLaughlin group, and you're wrong. Batya Ungar-Sargon, as always, she's always here, and she's always a delight, even when she's wrong. Michael Shellenberger, smart as a whip, and Olly Wiseman. And if you don't go over to the Free Press and sign up for his newsletter, you're just not getting the full scope of what's happening in American politics. Thank you all for joining us, and we will be back, I think, next Thursday. Is that right? We're going to be here next Thursday? If not, blame me, but I know Batya will be here. So thank you guys for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, guys.
Good to be with you guys.